Welcome to this component-free screencast on functionalist theories of social inequality. Now hopefully you remember from last year that functionalists have a distinct image of what society looks like and how it works. Functionalists see society as being similar to a physical organism such as the human body, with all of the different parts contributing to the whole. So according to this organic analogy, each part of society, so the different institutions and social practices that you find within society, fulfill functions that contribute to the health and well-being of the whole of society. Now the word function refers to the beneficial consequences of an action. So if we take, for example, the morning ritual of having a cup of coffee, for many people this has some obvious beneficial consequences. It helps people to wake up, it gives people a sense of focus, it gives them an energy boost when they need it. These are some of the functions, some of the beneficial consequences of caffeine, the drug that you find within the morning cup of coffee. Now, according to functionalism, social institutions come about and persist in society because they play a function within that society, because they help to promote things like stability and social integration. And this is why this perspective argues that we should always explain the existence of enduring social arrangements by looking for the function or functions that are being performed by them. One of the things that functionalists observe is that social stratification seems to be a feature of all societies. For example, traditional societies might have a stratification based on caste, and modern industrial societies might have a stratification system based on your economic status or your social class. Now, given that some form of stratification seems to be a feature of all societies, functionalists argue that stratification is actually a functional prerequisite. In other words, what they mean by that is they argue that stratification is actually indispensable to the stability of societies, that all societies require a system of stratification to place people in different hierarchical roles. According to functionalist writers such as Davis and Moore, a feature of modern industrial societies, such as the United States of America and the UK, is that they have relatively open and competitive systems of social stratification. In other words, the assumption that functionalists are making is that these societies are relatively meritocratic, that the system of stratification is based largely on achieved status. And from this perspective, the whole of society benefits from talented people moving up into demanding occupations in which they are more highly rewarded for the conscientious application of their special abilities. So from the perspective of Davis and Moore, the high level of income inequality that you find within societies like our own, like the United States of America, is actually a good thing. It's a good thing because they argue that it provides a motivating factor which enhances competition, which creates economic growth and wealth for society as a whole. And they argue that the high incomes earned by the people at the top of society offer due return to talents that might be in scarce supply in society, and also those higher incomes are seen as compensatory reward for the sacrifices that individuals might have had to have made by, for example, extending their education and training in order to have risen to the top. So from the perspective of Davis and Moore, substantial income inequality in the context of an open and meritocratic stratification system is actually very beneficial for society. So in summary, functionalists argue that social inequality is a good thing. It's a way of ensuring that people are matched to jobs that make the most of their particular talents, and that furthermore, functionalists argue that this meritocratic system creates incentives for members of society to strive to achieve their best so that they can climb the stratification system. And this benefits society as a whole because it ensures that everybody in society is competing and working hard. And as a result of that, it ensures that there is maximum utilisation of human resources within society, and that really helps the economy to grow according to this perspective. Now, from the perspective of social stability, it's also important for people within society to accept their position within the stratification system as being fair and just. And for Talcott Parsons, another key functionalist writer, American capitalism best typifies the appropriate value system around which social consensus can be based. So from the perspective of Talcott Parsons, most Americans buy into a value system that is based on things like enterprise, competition, individual opportunity, individual achievement, self-support, materialistic aspiration, what collectively we might refer to as the American dream. And within American society, high status is widely seen not as a bad thing, but as a reward for conforming to the values of American society. So in the view of Talcott Parsons, stratification can also help to reinforce the collective goals of a society. And even those members of society who lack the qualities required for the top jobs and therefore occupy relatively low positions in the stratification system, if they buy into this value system, they're going to accept their social position. So if they've been successfully socialized into agreeing that some jobs do deserve higher rewards than others because they're functionally more important to the smooth running of society, then you're going to get stability. And functionalists would argue that most people are generally happy to accept, for example, that surgeons deserve more economic rewards than hospital porters, for example. And from this perspective, the function of the education system is to allocate individuals to an occupational role that best suits their abilities. This is what they call the role allocation function of education, and it happens via the examinations and qualifications that students take towards the end of their education. And this is seen as fair because it's based on universal standards of assessment that apply to everybody in the same way. Functionalism is an example of what we call a consensus theory, in that it emphasises the way in which society operates in order to benefit the whole of the population. And as we've just seen, it therefore sees inequality and social stratification as making a positive contribution to the whole of society. However, this perspective is heavily criticised, particularly by those sociologists who adopt more of a conflict perspective when analysing society. For example, Marxists argue that functionalist writers such as Davis and Moore simply provide rich people with an ideology that justifies their greed and selfishness. So they come to believe that they are worth so much more than people lower down in the system of stratification. And Marxists would also argue that the idea of meritocracy that underpins the functionalist perspective is simply a myth. So this idea of the American dream, from a Marxist perspective, you have to be asleep to believe it. America is an economic system where the game has been rigged in favour of the rich and powerful. And for the functionalist perspective to have credence, you would need a society with very high levels of social mobility. And again, if we look this time at the example of the UK, what we see when we analyse this particular reporting class is there's real evidence that social mobility has ground to a halt within the UK. In other words, there's very little empirical evidence to support the functionalist idea that we have an open, competitive, meritocratic system of stratification. And feminists and critical race theorists also argue that discrimination in society based on gender, based on ethnicity, also undermines the functionalist assumption that society is fair and meritocratic. Furthermore, the overall functionalist argument that high levels of income inequality are actually beneficial for society can also be subjected to serious criticism. For example, in their recent book, The Spirit Level, Wilson and Pickett argue that health and social problems are far worse in societies that have very high levels of income inequality. Also, if we look at the top of the stratification system within countries like our own in America, we find that those positions are occupied not only by those with functionally important jobs that have required lots of hard work, lots of education. We also find that some of those positions are occupied either by those who live off inherited wealth or by celebrities. And neither of these two groups is necessarily functionally important to our society. Also, there are many occupations within our society that are absolutely crucial to the smooth running of society, that are functionally essential but are not particularly highly rewarded. The final criticism of functionalism that I want to make is that at the heart of this analysis appears to be a significant logical flaw. Functionalism is based on what we might call a tautology, or what in everyday speak we would call a circular argument, and the main objection to this kind of reasoning is that it treats an effect as a cause. For example, Davis and Moore's theory of stratification outlines the positive effects or functions of social stratification and then goes on to argue that these effects explain its origin. But an effect cannot explain a cause, since cause must always come before effect, and therefore the effects of stratification cannot occur until a system of social stratification has already been established.